Well, hello, everybody. This is Wednesday, so that means it must be Writing with Ralph. I'm Ralph Fletcher, um, and this is the number one show on television. Well, actually, that's not true. We're actually not on television, we're on YouTube. But we do have a bunch of people that are watching and thinking about writing and want to keep that writing part of ourselves alive, which is great. And I'm glad to be here. And you know, um, I'm glad I get to talk about something that I'm passionate about and I'm excited about. Today's session is going to be about writing memoir, um, which is an interesting and a kind of a big topic. But let's start by reading some poems, reading a few things. So here's a poem that I wrote called Water Lily. And sort of like it's actually a good example of what we talked about before about writing from a mask. Um, so the water lily actually speaks to the reader. So here we go. Water lily. I am famous, the sacred lotus, a symbol of grace and purity, though to croaking frogs I am no more than a hangout joint in all night store. My petals enfold stamens of gold. I float serene, while down below, these roots of mine are deeply stuck in the coolest, most delicious muck. I kind of had fun with that poem, and I think that one of the things that makes that poem work is you've got the tension between kind of that lofty way that the water lily describes itself, but then also the reality of kind of everyday things of just frogs hanging out and being stuck in the muck. And we haven't really focused too much on rhyming poetry, but I did write a poem once that I kind of like, just about one of the most important things on our planet, and that is water. And this poem kind of taps into the chemical symbol for water, so it's called H2O. And it goes like this. The recipe for water is the same as it's always been: 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen. 2 to 1, that's the rule to make a water molecule. 2 to 1. Okay, there we go. Um, so every session that I have, I invite young writers to, or writers of any age, to send me something that they wrote, and I get a bunch of stuff. And last time we talked about writing from a mask, and I invited you to actually try that, to take something inanimate in the world and actually become it and write about yourself and how you experience the world, kind of pretending that you are that thing. And one of the writers that did a really interesting job was a boy named Noah, and he wrote a piece called Coronavirus, which certainly is timely right now. He actually pretended that he was the coronavirus. Listen to this. I can take over a body. I can shut down schools. I eat up cells. I keep everyone trapped behind windows and doors. But there is one thing I cannot break. I cannot break the chain of love. I thought that was powerful. I really thought that was a powerful poem. And it's a reminder that as much as we're being monstrously inconvenienced by social distancing and all these stay at home orders, um, we are stronger than that and we have that bond of love. All right. So, before we kind of get into memoir, I just want to ask you a simple question. How are you doing? Um, how's it going? And one of the benefits of writing, I think, is that it allows us to pause, to slow down, and to kind of take stock and reflect on what's going on right now. So let's do that right now, okay? Um, Take out your writer's notebook, or any kind of writing that you're doing. It's a iPad or whatever you got. Um, could be even a computer, or just a piece of paper. And I'm going to ask you to let's just take a minute and a half and just write down, like, how you feeling right now. Just take out some paper and write down how you're feeling, and I'll actually time this. Okay, so let's go to it right now. I'll do it too. All right. Um, Thank you for doing that. And when you're when the session is over, I encourage you to read what you wrote to a friend, or if you're watching this on the YouTube, you can certainly stop it right now and just take a minute and just share with each other what you wrote. I'll read you what I wrote in my notebook. How am I feeling? Well, I'm feeling a little bit hopeful. There's some good news, some bits of good news, but really I feel like I'm underwater, looking up at the bright surface. I'm floating up toward it, but I haven't reached that surface yet. That's kind of the way I'm feeling these days. Okay, so let us talk about writing memoir. Um, as you guys know, I've written memoir. Um, it's something that I've done, and it's funny. Like one of the things about writing is that people often specialize in a certain kind of writing. And one of the things about myself as a writer is that I do all kinds of different writing. I write about all kinds of things, and I try different um, genres of writing. I find myself sometimes I get excited by trying a new genre that I haven't tried before, and that was true with memoir. I really had never written in a specific way to say I'm really trying to write a memoir in my life. So I wrote these two books, and then I also just want to mention that I wrote this little book that's how to write memoir, how to write your life story, um, and I'd recommend that book. I think you can go back and find some good tips in there. Um, and there's, of course, there are lots of examples of memoir out there. I mean, it's one of the most enduring genres and kinds of writing that we have. Um, One of the books that's really high on my list to read is Ordinary Hazards by Nikki Grimes. I'm looking forward to reading that. That's a new memoir. I love Chris Crutcher's memoir, King of the Mild Frontier. Some of you guys maybe have looked at Knots on My Yo-Yo String by Jerry Spinelli. Um, for older writers and older readers, if you're in high school or older, I'd really recommend Jack Canto's book, A Hole in My Life. A pretty intense book for younger readers, but I think it's also a pretty amazing book. So there's lots of memoir out there. There's all kinds of things. So, um, and I guess what I want to say is that a memoir isn't a is a personal account of your life, and but it's not a record of your entire existence. Okay, um, so let me just share a few tips about writing memoir, and I'm actually going to read a few things too. So part of what we'll spend the time doing is actually reading. And by the way, I just want to say something about reading my own material. Just to be really honest with you and honest with myself, I'm not the most important writer in the world. Um, I'm second most important. No, just kidding. Seriously, I understand that I'm not the most important writer in the world, but I look at myself as a writer whose work I know best, so I can share my own process. But obviously, there are millions of other writers out there, and I encourage you to explore them all. So, the first tip I want to share with you is that when you're writing memoir, you still want to tell a good story. Okay, um, and you know how to do that, right? You want to have interesting characters, you want to have tense situations, you want to have a problem, and usually the problem gets worse before it gets any better. That's an interesting thing about stories. And there's often an element of surprise in good story. So, um, you know, memoir is important in that it draws on what we know about story. Um, in my book, Marshall Dreams, one of my favorite chapters is a chapter called Eating the World. And it's a story about a time that one of my little brothers just decided to go outside and just start finding things and just putting it in his mouth and eating things that he shouldn't be eating, not food. Um, he even ate a cigarette he found in the street. And as you're reading this story, and it's a pretty good story in the sense that you just want to say, like, first of all, you say, what is this kid doing? Why is he doing it? What's going to happen to him? Is he going to get sick? Is he going to have to go to the hospital? So it's kind of like an interesting story. It's an interesting premise for a story. So that's the first thing. When you write memoir, you want to tell a good story. Okay. Um, and I just want to say, sometimes when people write memoir and they write a story that happened, they'll say, "Well, this really happened to me." And I don't want to be rude, but I want to say, well, so what? A lot of things have happened to me that I don't write about because they're boring. They're not interesting. The reader will yawn and fall asleep. Um, there's kind of an unwritten understanding, like a deal between the person who writes the memoir and the reader. And the deal is this: the writer, the memoirist, has selected a few stories that are important because they say something about the writer's life. They're about identity. Um, and it could be about, you select things like it could be the, the birth of a little brother. It could be about moving to a new place, or a time that your mother gets sick, or maybe a time that you were betrayed by a friend, or maybe a time you had a first kiss. I mean, there's all kinds of things that, but you're choosing those moments because they're important in some way to you. Um, and they have, so that's one thing. Second thing is that a memoir um, is representative of the author's life. And it says something about who you are, and that's kind of what I just said before. But I want to just emphasize that you don't just pick anything. In my book, Marshfield Memories, I wrote about going to a marsh with my my uncle. Actually, it was not my uncle, but it was my dad's friend, Dexter Harris. I thought of him as an uncle. One Saturday, Dad's best friend, Dexter Harris, took us clamming. We would dig for them in a clam flat, but we had first had to pass through a marsh field. And by the way, that's where the name Marshfield comes, marsh field. While we hiked, Dexter tried to educate us. A salt marsh is an important place in nature, he explained. All kinds of birds, plants, insects, and fish live there. This place is teeming with life. Lainey wrinkled her nose. It smells stinky. Dexter smiled. That's the smell of the mud in low tide. You'll get used to it. So how you guys doing? Tommy, is everything okay? Tommy chewed his lower lip. No. What's wrong? Jimmy asked. I don't like this place, Tommy muttered. We reached a small stream. It was a tiny gap, barely a foot wide. We all stepped over easily, everybody except Tommy. I can't. Come on, Dexter urged. It's no big deal. Just step across. No, Tommy objected. He looked down, eyes wild with fear and panic. There's mud down there. There's quicksand. There's no quicksand, Laney assured him. But suddenly her eyes narrowed. She glanced up at Dexter. Is there? Probably not, though you do need to be careful, he told her. If you're stuck in the mud, when the tide comes in, you could get when you're in the mud, when the tide comes in, you could get stuck. I heard one guy get stuck in the mud flat when the tide came in, and the mud swallowed his car. I blinked at him. Really? He nodded. But I seriously doubt there's any quicksand around here. Come on, Tommy. All you've got to do is step over to the other side. It's not far at all. You can do it. No, Tommy cried. Jimmy shook his head in disbelief. What a baby. Shh, Dexter told him. Making fun of him won't help. Come on, Tommy. We got to move. I promised your mother we'd bring home a bucket of steamed clams, and she's going to be mighty mad if we don't. I can't, Tommy pleaded. So Dexter picked him up and swung him to the other side. Oh, Tommy gasped, amazed to find himself on solid land instead of getting sucked down into the ooze. We continued trekking through the marsh. My brother stayed miserable. The moment we reached the tiniest rivulet, the smallest gap, he halted and wouldn't budge. Each time Dexter had to lift him to the other side. But gradually, Tommy began to relax, which was a relief. Now, I could stop worrying about him and start to appreciate my surroundings. The marsh was full of birds, gulls and terns and red-winged blackbirds. I loved the feel of the spongy ground and being enveloped by the tall, tall grass. The wind singing through the grasses made a soft, high-pitched sound I loved. Down low, beneath the tops of the grass, I felt cocooned and protected from the wind. Dexter said, the marsh is the place where the ocean shakes hands with the land. I loved that thought and wanted to remember it always. I was a kid who loved the sound of words. I marveled at how they could paint a mind picture, how they could work together to create a mood or feeling. When I heard a word or thought that caught my attention, I wrote it down in my little notebook I kept hidden between my box spring and the mattress. I didn't know it then, but that little notebook would become precious to me. It would serve as a piggy bank of language, words, and ideas I would draw upon again and again as I became a writer. So you can see there that I start writing about the event in my childhood. It's something that happened with my brothers and sisters, but then I kind of stepped back a little bit, talked about something that was really about me in my whole life. So that's something to remember. And I guess that's one of the tips I want to say, that there is that reflective quality in the memoir. It's not just a story, but there's a sense of looking back. And what you don't want to do, obviously, is beat the reader on the head, and say, this was important to me because. But it should be kind of like woven into the story in some way. And remember when you guys wrote, and some of you tried your hand at the idea of the good old days, where you started with my first line and then you ended with my last line. Well, those were memoirs in a way, because you were really looking back on an important time in your life when things were simpler. So, the other thing I was going to say is that, and here's a tip about writing memoir. When you think about writing, oftentimes we're writing back to a time that we can't remember everything that happened. Obviously, I didn't walk around with a tape recorder recording everything that my brothers and sisters said. But when I wrote that little chapter in all my memoir, I gave myself permission to reinvent the truth. So I guess I would put it like this: you can't invent big stuff. I can't pretend that my dad played baseball for the Yankees or the Red Sox. I can't say that my dad was a famous rock and roll guitar player for Aerosmith. No, but what I can do is I can invent the details of what happened. What my brother was wearing that day, what I was wearing, um, what food we had for lunch, even the dialogue of what people said back and forth. So I guess I would say that you can give yourself permission to invent the small details, but you need to stay true to the bones of the story of your life. Okay. So the other thing I just want to mention also is that memoir doesn't have to be very long. A memoir can be quite short. I'm a junior, which is to say that uh, my dad's name was Ralph Joseph Fletcher, and that's my name. So when I wrote that chapter, I started down here, and I ended it right up here. So the chapter is quite short. Just a little bit of writing in it, and so your memoir doesn't have to be 20 pages or 15 pages. It can be a page. And it could even be shorter than that. It could be half a page, especially if you write a poem and you really condense it down. So, yeah, my challenge to you today would be to try to write some memoir. Try your hands at it. Dip your toes in the pond and see what happens. And you might want to go back, look through your notebook, and see if something jumps out at you. But look for something that's important, something that tugs at your sleeve. One of the things that I do when I write memoirs, I look for a time in my life when something changed. Changes are oftentimes important to write about. You might write about an important first in your life, the first time I did this. Um, and I was also thinking about, we talk about the idea of writing about a first, but what people never think about is, how about the last? Like when you're a little kid, there's a big thunder and lightning storm, you jump in bed with mom and dad, right? That's a place where you feel safe. But there comes a time in your life, at some point, your parents probably say to you, you know what? You're a little too big to jump in bed with us. So think back on the last time that you did that. And that's something that you might want to use as a springboard into writing. Okay. So I would love to see you give it a shot. Doesn't have to be long, like I said. And of course, I'd love to hear anybody that writes anything. So this is my email address: figpudding@gmail.com. Figpudding@gmail.com. Feel free to email it to me. I'd love to read it. I'm always interested in what you have to write. Okay, everybody. Thanks very much, and thanks for spending these 20 minutes with us thinking about writing and trying to find a way that we can all together live the writing life. Okay, bye.